Now available in paperback. Those who refuse the gift of eternal life are condemned to wander in the darkness of eternal night. Get your copy of Eternal Night at online booksellers today. In 2019, actor David Damaskin and artist Lucas Kettner took us into the world of Count Crowley, the reluctant midnight monster hunter in Dark Horse Comics. And this story captured the spirit of old 1980s local TV stations and the B-grade movie hosts who used to host movie programs like Elvira's program and your Svengoolie is doing right now. And this series shows us the character transformation arc of reporter Jerry Butler as she turns from a failed reporter who is struggling with alcohol issues as related to her career and her transformation into movie hostess Count Crowley and the reluctant midnight monster hunter who hunts monsters after the show is over. Now, that miniseries, Count Crowley, the Reluctant Midnight Monster Hunter, was one of the best series of 2019 and one of the best comics of 2019, with excellent storytelling, fantastic character development, and some of the best art I have ever seen, capturing the spirit of old horror comics and capturing the spirit of old horror movies. So, Count Crowley, Reluctant Midnight Monster Hunter was an absolutely fantastic miniseries, and your David Damaskin, in between filming the Suicide Squad, developed a fantastic start to a sequel, Count Crowley, Amateur Midnight Monster Hunter. Now, your Count Crowley, Amateur Midnight Monster Hunter picks up right after your Count Crowley, Reluctant Midnight Monster Hunter, and the Amateur Midnight Monster Hunter shows your Jerry Butler's growth into her role as the hostess of the Count Crowley show, and also shows her growth as a monster hunter. Now, your Count Crowley Amateur Midnight Monster Hunter really does a great job as related to following up your Count Crowley Reluctant Midnight Monster Hunter, showing how your Jerry is slowly developing into the role of the Midnight Monster Hunter as she's dealing with the aftermath of taking out the Billy, also known as the zombie, in the previous miniseries, and is also dealing with her issues as related to her alcoholism and her issues as related to her personal life. Now, this first issue opens up with Jerry being in an AA meeting, running into the werewolf that had confronted her in the previous miniseries, and then having another run-in with him as in his human form, giving us a little bit further character development. Now, this further character development builds into the miniseries, which takes us into the aftermath of what happened after your Count Crowley killed this Billy, also known as the zombie. Now, this Billy was working for some people in your corporate America, and this whole layout of corporate America really reminds me of what I was putting together in my novel, The Temptation of John Haynes, where I talked about how these demons were running corporate America, and they were creating this corporate hell, and they were controlling the world behind the scenes while letting the humans believe that they had power. And that's the same premise being put here with your Count Crowley, Amateur Midnight Monster Hunter, as related to these supernatural creatures, and they've gotten this letter from the Billy in the city, and now they want to investigate what happened to their Billy that they had sent out here. And they want to find out what happened with this Billy as related to Count Crowley, and this further delves into the mystery as related to the disappearance of the original Count Crowley, whose last name was Barnes. So this whole story is building up to some very intriguing story points as related to the storyline, really flowing organically from the previous miniseries into this one. And the writing here is just absolutely top notch from David Damaskin. I love how he just weaves these miniseries together and makes them flow like it was an actual regular ongoing series. So I feel like I actually didn't miss anything as related to the previous series, and this new series also works as a great entry point to a new reader that will give them an incentive to go out here and pick up back issues of Count Crowley or the trade paperback. So the story structures here are very strong, and the storytelling here is very well done. So I really like how he's set up his premise in less than about 3 to 5 pages, which is what a good creator does. You set up your story very quickly, and you get the reader into the story as related to the plot points. Now, as we're learning more about the world of what's going on as to the new plot, we get your Jerry going to meet the old Count Crowley, and she talks about how she easily beat this zombie and was just being very cocky. And now she wants to go to get some research on how to stop a werewolf, but your old Count Crowley tries to tell her that this is a man's job, and your Jerry coming out of the women's lib movement from the 70s and the 80s, she doesn't really take that whole comment in a good way. So she takes it as a bit of an insult. And again, this shows how this writer has really done his research. David has done his research very well, because this is the 80s, and we were only just about 10, 15 years out of the women's lib movement. So this is a very well done scene, and in some ways it kind of reminds me of Batman Beyond between Bruce and Terry. And I really like the way that this scene and these panels really sets up. And he explains how you really take down a werewolf. It's not silver bullets, because the way those are just tall tales as related to this universe. The other things that relate to taking down these supernatural creatures require a totally different set of skills. And your Jerry has been told that she can't really do these kind of things because it's usually the people who are chosen are men. But it looks like your Count Crowley, like she's fitting right into the role of your Count Crowley, and it's showing that a woman can do this job. So in some ways, again, I see Batman Beyond, I see Buffy the Vampire Slayer here, a lot of great elements of great storytelling, and I really like the way everything is flowing in this comic. It's just extremely well done. Now, as she's having this discussion with the old Count Crowley, one of these vampires is coming to her area in Mississippi, and that vampire is not somebody you really want to mess with, because as he's getting into this vehicle to go to meet and find out what's going on, he decides to have a little snack. And I really love the details here as related to this story, because they show us an Oldsmobile 98 from 1983 or 1984, and that really shows the skill of the artist and the writers of taking care as related to the details of the 1980s. Just fantastic detail work as related to the storytelling, and it really helps keep the story going. Now the story moves on with her going and learning about how successful the Count Crowley show is, but she really wants to go out here and be a reporter again. But we learn that she uses her reporting skills to go out here and investigate things as related to this werewolf, and this whole situation with the werewolf leads to her running back into that werewolf, and we learn more about the personal life of this werewolf. And this werewolf is actually been a victim of a female werewolf who is really a very dangerous creature. And that's just in her human form, where your Jerry has a big fight with this werewolf Crystal, and this werewolf transforms into a monster, and it looks like your Jerry is in a really bad pickle for the conclusion of the first issue, and a fantastic twist that leads to you anticipating picking up that second issue of Count Crowley. Now your Count Crowley looks like the amateur Midnight Monster Hunter is just as fantastic as the Reluctant Midnight Monster Hunter, and this Amateur Midnight Monster Hunter mini-series starts off very strong. I have to say that this is looking like one of the best comics of 2022, and this first issue is one of the best comics I have seen in 2022. Just absolutely fantastic writing from David Damaskin, with good character development, good plotting, and excellent pacing, and just overall story just flows beautifully. And then we have Lucas Kettner putting together some absolutely fantastic art on Count Crowley that practically captures the spirit of life in the 1980s and really captures all of the elements of a 1980s horror comic, and captures that spirit of the 1980s on every page. As a kid who grew up in the 80s watching these 80s horror movies, and grew up reading old 80s comics, everything here practically takes me back to the days of 83 and 84, when I was about 10 or 11 years old, and it takes me back and it sees things, clearly, and it's just absolutely well done. And I was floored by this first issue, and I'm definitely eager to pick up the next. And I definitely recommend everybody go out here and pick up a copy of Count Crowley, Amateur Midnight Monster Hunter, because this comic is going to brighten your day. It is one of the best comics of 2022, and you definitely will not be disappointed by Count Crowley. This is a great comic, and it definitely will be a comic that you will want to add to your collection. And once you pick up that first issue, you're definitely either going to come back for the back issues or the trade paperback. This is one you want to have in hard copy, because this is the kind of comic you read over and over again and find something else new. And this is the kind of comic that just is an absolute blast to read. I mean, this book was absolutely fun and just absolutely well done. And I want to see more readers pick up Count Crowley and see this series continue on, because David Damaskin has done a fantastic job with this character. And I'm hoping one day we definitely get to see a movie, because I could easily see Jerry's story turn into a movie like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or a TV series. It's just that well done, and the concept in the premise is just that really solidly structured. I could see it easily translating from your comic to TV screen or film screen, and this is just it does what a great comic does: sets up the premise, develops the characters, moves the story forward, and gets you anticipating and counting down the days to the next issue. Again, definitely recommend you pick up Count Crowley, Amateur Midnight Monster Hunter. And in this comic, your David Damaskin shows us how much of a professional he is as related to his skills as a comic book writer. And he shows us that he's got a great career in comics if he ever decides that he doesn't want to do acting anymore. So if you want to see me do more comic review videos, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. And if you want to try out my first comic, Eastine No Good Deed, you can find it on Amazon's Kindle for 99 cents. And that's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. If you think you've seen scares, get ready for the horror of the hyena woman.